Everyone loves to listen to a good book, and there are so many wonderful ones to choose, so we decided to bring you this podcast of Stories Come to Life. Each episode features a story from either classic or modern literature, especially chosen to be interesting and exciting to hear. So sit back, relax, and listen to this story come to life. Welcome to Stories Come to Life. I am your host, Kathryn Lopez Luker. Polly is still visiting the Shaw family, and sometimes she feels homesick for her own family. You see, her home is filled with love, and to her surprise, the Shaw home is not. Polly can't understand why, but she sets to work to do the small and simple things that bring peace and affection to a household. Even incorrigible Tom is touched by her kindly ways. Now sit back, relax, and listen to this story come to life. An Old-Fashioned Girl by Louisa May Alcott. Chapter 3. Polly's Troubles. Polly soon found that she was in a new world, a world where the manners and customs were so different from the simple ways at home that she felt like a stranger in a strange land, and often wished that she had not come. In the first place, she had nothing to do but lounge and gossip, read novels, parade the streets, and dress. And before a week was gone, she was as heartily sick of all this as a healthy person would be who attempted to live on confectionery. Fanny liked it because she was used to it, and had never known anything better. But Polly had, and often felt like a little wood-bird shut up in a gilded cage. Nevertheless, she was much impressed by the luxuries all about her, enjoyed them and wished she owned them, and wondered why the Shaws were not a happier family. She was not wise enough to know where the trouble lay. She did not attempt to say which of the two lives was the right one. She only knew which she liked best, and supposed it was merely another of her old-fashioned ways. Fanny's friends did not interest her much. She was rather afraid of them. They seemed so much older and wiser than herself, even those younger in years. They talked about things of which she knew nothing, and when Fanny tried to explain, she didn't find them interesting. Indeed, some of them rather shocked and puzzled her. So the girls let her alone, being civil when they met, but evidently feeling that she was too odd to belong to their set. Then she turned to Maud for companionship, for her own little sister was excellent company, and Polly loved her dearly. But Miss Maud was much absorbed in her own affairs, for she belonged to a set also, and these little mites of 5 and 6 had their musicals, their parties, receptions, and promenades, as well as their elders, and the chief idea of their little lives seemed to be to ape the fashionable follies they should have been too innocent to understand. Maud had her tiny card case, and paid calls like Mamma and Fan, her box of dainty gloves, her jewelry drawer, her crimping pins, as fine and fanciful a wardrobe as a Paris doll, and a French maid to dress her. Polly couldn't get on with her at first, for Maud didn't seem like a child, and often corrected Polly in her conversation and manners, though little Mademoiselle's own were anything but perfect. Now and then, when Maud felt poorly or had a whacktious turn, for she had nerves as well as Mamma, she would go to Polly to be amused, for her gentle ways and kind forbearance soothed the little fine lady better than anything else. Polly enjoyed these times and told stories, played games, or went out walking, just as Maud liked, slowly and surely winning the child's heart, and relieving the whole house of the young tyrant who ruled it. Tom soon got over staring at Polly, and at first did not take much notice of her, for in his opinion, girls didn't amount to much anyway. And, considering the style of girl he knew most about, Polly quite agreed with him. He occasionally refreshed himself by teasing her to see how she'd stand it, and caused Polly much anguish of spirit, for she never knew where he would take her next. He bounced out at her from behind doors, booed at her in dark entries, clutched her feet as she went upstairs, startled her by shrill whistles right in her ear, or sudden tweaks of the hair as he passed her in the street. And as sure as there was company to dinner, he fixed his round eyes on her, and never took them off till she was reduced to a piteous state of confusion and distress. She used to beg him not to plague her, but he said he did it for her good. She was too shy, and needed toughening like the other girls. In vain she protested that she didn't want to be like the other girls in that respect. He only laughed in her face, stuck his red hair straight up all over his head, and glared at her, till she fled in dismay. Yet Polly rather liked Tom, for she soon saw that he was neglected, hustled out of the way and left to get on pretty much by himself. She wondered why his mother didn't pet him as she did the girls, why his father ordered him about as if he were a born rebel, and took so little interest in his only son. Fanny considered him a bear, and was ashamed of him, but never tried to polish him up a bit, and Maud and he lived together like a cat and a dog who did not belong to a happy family. Grandma was the only one who stood by poor old Tom, and Polly more than once had discovered him doing something kind for Madam, and seeming very much ashamed when it was found out. He wasn't respectful at all. He called her the old lady, and told her he wouldn't be fussed over. But when anything was the matter, he always went to the old lady, and was very grateful for the fussing. Polly liked him for this, and often wanted to speak of it, but she had a feeling that it wouldn't do, for in praising their affection, she was reproaching others with neglect. So she held her tongue, and thought about it all the more. Grandma was rather neglected too, and perhaps that is the reason why Tom and she were such good friends. She was even more old-fashioned than Polly, but people didn't seem to mind it so much in her, as her day was supposed to be over, and nothing was expected of her but to keep out of everybody's way, and to be handsomely dressed when she appeared before people. Grandma led a quiet, solitary life in her own rooms, full of old furniture, pictures, books, and relics of a past for which no one cared but herself. Her son went up every evening for a little call. He was very kind to her, and saw that she wanted nothing money could buy. But he was a busy man, so intent on getting rich that he had no time to enjoy what he already possessed. Madam never complained, interfered, or suggested, but there was a sad sort of quietude about her, a wistful look in her faded eyes, as if she wanted something which money could not buy. And when children were near, she hovered about them, evidently longing to cuddle and caress them as only grandmothers can. Polly felt this, and as she missed the home petting, gladly showed that she liked to see the quiet old face brighten as she entered the solitary room where few children came, except the phantoms of little sons and daughters, who, to the motherly heart that loved them, never faded or grew up. Polly wished the children would be kinder to Grandma, but it was not for her to tell them so, although it troubled her a great deal, and she could only try to make up for it by being as dutiful and affectionate as if their grandma was her own. Another thing that disturbed Polly was the want of exercise. To dress up and parade certain streets for an hour every day, to stand talking in doorways, or to drive out in a fine carriage was not the sort of exercise she liked, and Fan would take no other. Indeed, she was so shocked when Polly one day proposed to run down the mall that her friend never dared suggest such a thing again. At home, Polly ran and rode, coasted and skated, jumped rope and raked hay, worked in her garden and rowed her boat, so no wonder she longed for something more lively than a daily promenade with a flock of giddy girls who tilted along in high-heeled boots and costumes which made Polly ashamed to be seen with some of them. So she used to slip out alone sometimes, when Fanny was absorbed in novels, company, or millinery, and get fine brisk walks around the park, on the unfashionable side, where the babies took their airings. Or she went inside the park to watch the boys coasting, and to wish she could coast too as she did at home. She never went far, and always came back rosy and refreshed. One afternoon, just before dinner, she felt so tired of doing nothing that she slipped out for a run. It had been a dull day, but the sun was visible now, setting brightly below the clouds. It was cold, but still, and Polly trotted down the smooth, snow-covered mall, humming to herself, and trying not to feel homesick. The coasters were at it with all their might, and she watched them, till her longing to join the fun grew irresistible. On the hill, some little girls were playing with their sleds. Real little girls, in warm hoods and coats, rubber boots and mittens, and Polly felt drawn toward them, in spite of her fear of Van. "I want to go down, but I don't dare, it's so steep," said one of them, those common children as Maud called them. "If you lend me your sled and sit in my lap, I'll take you down all nice," answered Polly in a confidential tone. The little girls took a look at her, seemed satisfied, and accepted her offer. Polly looked carefully around to see that no fashionable eye beheld the awful deed, and finding all safe, settled her freight and spun away down the hill, feeling all over the delightsome excitement of swift motion which makes coasting such a favorite pastime with the more sensible portion of the child world. One after another she took the little girls down the hill and dragged them up again, while they regarded her in the light of a gray-coated angel, descended for their express benefit. Polly was just finishing off with one delicious go all by herself, when she heard a familiar whistle behind her, and before she could get off, up came Tom, looking as much astonished as if he had found her mounted on an elephant. "Hello, Polly! What'll Fan say to you?" was his polished salutation. "I don't know, and I don't care. Coasting is no harm. I like it, and I'm going to do it now I've got a chance. So clear the lula!" And away went independent Polly, with her hair blowing in the wind, and an expression of intense enjoyment, which a very red nose didn't damage in the least. "Good for you, Polly!" And casting himself upon his sled, with the most reckless disregard for his ribs, off whizzed Tom after her, and came alongside, just as she reined up General Grant on the broad path below. "Oh, won't you get it when we go home?" cried the young gentleman, even before he changed his graceful attitude. "I shan't if you don't go and tell. But of course you will," added Polly, sitting still, while an anxious expression began to steal over her happy face. "I just won't, then," returned Tom, with the natural perversity of his tribe. "If they ask me, I shall tell, of course. If they don't ask, I think there's no harm in keeping still. I shouldn't have done it, if I hadn't known my mother was willing, but I don't wish to trouble your mother by telling of it. Do you think it was very dreadful of me?" asked Polly, looking at him. "I think it was downright jolly, and I won't tell if you don't want me to. Now come up and have another one," said Tom heartily. "Just one more. The little girls want to go. This is their sled." "Let 'em take it. It isn't good for much, and you come up on mine. Mazeppa's a stunner. You see if he isn't." So Polly tucked herself up in front. Tom hung on behind in some mysterious manner, and Mazeppa proved that he fully merited his master's sincere, if inelegant, praise. They got on capitally now, for Tom was in his proper sphere, and showing his best side, being civil and kindly in the bluff boy fashion that was natural to him, while Polly forgot to be shy, and liked this sort of toughening much better than the other. They laughed and talked and kept taking just one more, till the sunshine was all gone, and the clock struck dinner time. "We shall be late. Let's run," said Polly as they came into the path after the last coast. "You just sit still and I'll get you home in a jiffy." And before she could unpack herself, Tom trotted off with her at a fine pace. "Here's a pair of cheeks. I wish you'd get a color like this, Fanny," said Mr. Shaw, as Polly came into the dining room after smoothing her hair. "Your nose is as red as that cranberry sauce," answered Fan, coming out of the big chair where she had been curled up for an hour or two, deep in Lady Audley's Secret. "So it is," said Polly, shutting one eye to look at the offending feature. "Never mind. I've had a good time anyway," she added, giving a little prance in her chair. "I don't see much fun in these cold runs you're so fond of taking," said Fanny, with a yawn and a shiver. "Perhaps you would if you'd tried it," and Polly laughed as she glanced at Tom. "Did you go alone, dear?" asked Grandma, patting the rosy cheek beside her. "Yes'm, but I met Tom, and we came home together." Polly's eyes twinkled when she said that, and Tom choked in his soup. "Thomas, leave this table," commanded Mr. Shaw, as his incorrigible son gurgled and gasped behind his napkin. "Oh, please don't send him away, sir. I made him laugh," said Polly penitently. "What's the joke?" asked Fanny, waking up at last. "I shouldn't think you'd made him laugh when he's always making you cry," observed Maud, who had just come in. "What have you been doing now, sir?" demanded Mr. Shaw, as Tom emerged, red and solemn, from his brief obscurity. "Nothing but coast," he said gruffly, for Papa was always lecturing him, and letting the girls do just as they liked. "So's Polly. I saw her. Me and Blanche were coming home just now, and we saw her and Tom whiting down the hill on his sled, and then he'd wagged her ever so far," cried Maud, with her mouth full. "You didn't!" And Fanny dropped her fork with a scandalized face. "Yes, I did, and I liked it ever so much," answered Polly, looking anxious but resolute. "Did anyone see you?" cried Fanny. "Only some little girls. And Tom." "It was horridly improper, and Tom ought to have told you so if you didn't know any better. I should be mortified to death if any of my friends saw you," added Fan, much disturbed. "Now don't you scold, it's no harm, and Polly shall coast if she wants to, mayn't she, Grandma?" cried Tom, gallantly coming to the rescue, and securing a powerful ally. "My mother lets me, and if I don't go among the boys, I can't see what harm there is in it," said Polly, before Madam could speak. "People do many things in the country that are not proper here," began Mrs. Shaw in her reproving tone. "Let the child do it if she likes, and take Maud with her. I should be glad to have one hearty girl in my house," interrupted Mr. Shaw. And that was the end of it. "Thank you, sir," said Polly gratefully, and nodded at Tom, who telegraphed back, "All right," and fell upon his dinner with the appetite of a young wolf. "Oh, you sly boots! You're getting up a flirtation with Tom, are you?" whispered Fanny to her friend, as if much amused. "What?" And Polly looked so surprised and indignant that Fanny was ashamed of herself, and changed the subject by telling her mother she needed some new gloves. Polly was very quiet after that, and the minute dinner was over, she left the room to go and have a quiet think about the whole matter. Before she got halfway upstairs, she saw Tom coming after, and immediately sat down to guard her feet. He laughed and said as he perched himself on one of the posts of the banisters, "I won't grab you, honor bright. I just wanted to say if you'll come out tomorrow sometime, we'll have a good coast." "No," said Polly, "I can't come." "Why not? Are you mad? I didn't tell." And Tom looked amazed at the change which had come over her. "No, you kept your word and stood by me like a good boy. I'm not mad either, but I don't mean to coast any more. Your mother doesn't like it." "That isn't the reason, I know. You nodded to me after she'd freed her mind, and you meant to go then. Come now, what is it?" "I shan't tell you, but I'm not going," was Polly's determined answer. "Well, I did think you had more sense than most girls, but you haven't, and I wouldn't give a sixpence for you." "That's polite," said Polly, getting ruffled. "Well, I hate cowards." "I'm not a coward." Yes, you are. You're afraid of what folks'll say. Aren't you now, huh? Polly knew she was and held her peace, though she longed to speak, but how could she? I knew you'd back out. And Tom walked away with an air of scorn that cut Polly to the heart. It's too bad, just as he was growing kind to me, and I was going to have a good time. It's all spoiled by Fan's nonsense. Mrs. Shaw doesn't like it, nor Grandma either, I dare say. There'll be a fuss if I go, and Fan'll plague me so. So I'll give it up and let Tom think I'm afraid. Oh dear, I never did see such ridiculous people. Polly shut her door hard, and felt ready to cry with vexation that her pleasure should be spoiled by such a silly idea. For of all the silly freaks of this fast age, that of little people playing at love is about the silliest. Polly had been taught that it was a very serious and sacred thing, and according to her notions, it was far more improper to flirt with one boy than to coast with a dozen. She had been much amazed only the day before to hear Maud say to her mother, "Mamma, must I have a beau? The girls all do, and say I ought to have Fweddy Lovell, but I don't like him as well as Howie Fisk." "Oh, yes, I'd have a little sweetheart, dear, it's so cunning," answered Mrs. Shaw, and Maud announced soon after that she was engaged to Fweddy, 'cause Howie slapped her when she proposed the match. Polly laughed with the rest at the time, but when she thought of it afterward and wondered what her own mother would have said if little Kitty had put such a question, she didn't find it cunning or funny, but ridiculous and unnatural. She felt so now about herself, and when her first petulance was over, resolved to give up coasting and everything else, rather than have any nonsense with Tom, who, thanks to his neglected education, was as ignorant as herself of the charms of this new amusement for school children. So Polly tried to console herself by jumping rope in the backyard and playing tag with Maud in the drawing-room, where she likewise gave lessons in "Nas Gymnics," as Maud called it, which did that little person good. Fanny came up sometimes to teach them a new dancing step, and more than once was betrayed into a game of romps, for which she was none the worse. But Tom turned a cold shoulder to Polly, and made it evident, by his cavalier manner, that he really didn't think her worth a sixpence. Another thing that troubled Polly was her clothes, for though no one said anything, she knew they were very plain, and now and then she wished that her blue and mouse-colored merinos were rather more trimmed, her sashes had bigger bows, and her little ruffles more lace on them. She sighed for a locket, and for the first time in her life thought seriously of turning up her pretty curls and putting on a wad. She kept these discontents to herself, however, after she had written to her mother if she might have her best dress altered like Fanny's, and received this reply: "No, dear, the dress is proper and becoming as it is, and the old fashion of simplicity the best for all of us. I don't want my Polly to be loved for her clothes, but for herself, so wear the plain frocks mother took such pleasure in making for you, and let the panniers go. The least of us have some influence in this big world, and perhaps my little girl can do some good by showing others that a contented heart and a happy face are better ornaments than any Paris can give her. You want a locket, dearie, so I sent one that my mother gave me years ago. You will find father's face on one side, mine on the other, and when things trouble you, just look at your talisman, and I think the sunshine will come back again." Of course it did, for the best of all magic was shut up in the quaint little case that Polly wore inside her frock, and kissed so tenderly each night and morning. The thought that, insignificant as she was, she might yet do some good made her very careful of her acts and words, and so anxious to keep head contented and heart happy that she forgot her clothes and made others do the same. She did not know it, but that good old fashion of simplicity made the plain gowns pretty, and the grace of unconsciousness beautified their little wearer with the charm that makes girlhood sweetest to those who truly love and reverence it. One temptation Polly had already yielded to before the letter came, and repented heartily of afterward. "Polly, I wish you'd let me call you Marie," said Fanny one day as they were shopping together. "You may call me Mary if you like, but I won't have any I-E put onto my name. I'm Polly at home, and I'm fond of being called so. But Marie is Frenchified and silly. I spell my own name with an I-E, and so do all the girls. And look what a jumble of Netties, Nellies, Hatties, and Sallies there is. How Polly would look spelt so, Pollie. Well, never mind, that wasn't what I was going to say." "There's one thing you must have," said Fanny, "and that is bronze boots." "Why must I, when I've got enough without?" "Because it's the fashion to have them, and you can't be finished off properly without. I'm going to get a pair, and so must you." "Don't they cost a great deal?" $8 or $9, I believe. I have mine charged, but it doesn't matter if you haven't got the money. I can lend you some. I've got $10 to do with what I like, but it's meant to get some presents for the children." And Polly took out her purse in an undecided way. You can make presents easy enough. Grandma knows all sorts of nice contrivances. They'll do just as well, and then you can get your boots." "Well, I'll look at them," said Polly, following Fanny into the store, feeling rather rich and important to be shopping in this elegant manner. "Aren't they lovely? Your foot is perfectly divine in that boot. Polly, get them for my party, and you'll dance like a fairy," whispered Fan. Polly surveyed the dainty, shining boot with the scallop top, the jaunty heel, and the delicate toe, and thought her foot did look very well in it, and after a little pause said she would have them. And it was all very delightful till she got home, and was alone. Then, on looking into her purse, she saw $1, and the list of things she meant to get for her mother and the children. How mean the dollar looked all alone, and how long the list grew when there was nothing to buy the articles. "I can't make skates for Ned, nor a desk for Will, and those are what they've set their hearts upon. Father's book and mother's collar are impossible now, and I'm a selfish thing to go and spend all my money for myself. How could I do it?" And Polly eyed the new boots reproachfully as they stood in the first position, as if ready for the party. "They are lovely, but I don't believe they'll feel good, for I shall be thinking about my lost presents all the time," sighed Polly, pushing the enticing boots out of sight. "I'll go and ask Grandma what I can do, for if I've got to make something for everyone, I must begin right away or I shan't get done." And off she bustled, glad to forget her remorse in hard work. Grandma proved equal to the emergency, and planned something for everyone, supplying materials, taste, and skill in the most delightful manner. Polly felt much comforted, but while she began to knit a pretty pair of white bed socks to be tied with rose-colored ribbons for her mother, she thought some very sober thoughts upon the subject of temptation, and if anyone had asked her just then what made her sigh, as if something lay heavy on her conscience, she would have answered, "Bronze boots." Chapter 4. Little Things. "It's so rainy I can't go out, and everybody is so cross they won't play with me," said Maud, when Polly found her fretting on the stairs, and paused to ask the cause of her wails. "I'll play with you, only don't scream and wake your mother. What shall we play?" "I don't know. I'm tired of everything, 'cause my toys are all broken, and my dolls are all sick but Clara," moaned Maud, giving a jerk to the Paris doll, which she held upside down by one leg, in the most unmaternal manner. "I'm going to dress a dolly for my little sister. Wouldn't you like to see me do it?" asked Polly persuasively, hoping to beguile the cross child and finish her own work at the same time. "No, I shouldn't, because she'll look nicer than my Clara. Her clothes won't come off, and Tom spoiled 'em by playing ball with her in the yard." Wouldn't you like to rip these clothes off and have me show you how to make some new ones, so you can dress and undress Clara as much as you'd like? Oh, yes, I love to cut." And Maud's face brightened, for destructiveness is one of the earliest traits of childhood, and ripping was Maud's delight. Establishing themselves in the deserted dining room, the children fell to work, and when Fanny discovered them, Maud was laughing with all her heart at poor Clara, who, denuded of her finery, was cutting up all sorts of capers in the hands of her merry little mistress. "I should think you'd be ashamed to play with dolls, Polly. I haven't touched one this ever so long," said Fanny, looking down with a superior air. "I'm not ashamed, for it keeps Maud happy, and will please my sister Kitty, and I think sewing is better than prinking or reading silly novels, so now." And Polly stitched away with a resolute air, for she and Fanny had had a little tiff, because Polly wouldn't let her friend do up her hair like other folks and pierce her ears. "Don't be cross, dear, but come and do something nice. It's so dull today," said Fanny, anxious to be friends again, for it was doubly dull without Polly. "I can't, I'm busy." "You're always busy. I never saw such a girl. What in the world do you find to do all the time?" asked Fanny, watching with interest the set of the little red merino frock Polly was putting onto her doll. "Lots of things, but I like to be lazy sometimes as much as you do. Just lie on the sofa and read fairy stories or think about nothing." "Would you have a white muslin apron or a black silk?" asked Polly, surveying her work with satisfaction. "Muslin, with pockets, and tiny blue bows. I'll show you how." And forgetting her hate and contempt for dolls, down sat Fanny, soon getting as much absorbed as either of the others. The dull day brightened wonderfully after that, and the time flew pleasantly as tongues and needles went together. Grandma peeped in and smiled at the busy group, saying, "Sew away, my dears. Dollies are safe companions, and needlework an accomplishment that's sadly neglected nowadays. Small stitches, Maud. Neat buttonholes, Fan. Cut carefully, Polly, and don't waste your cloth. Take pains, and the best needlewoman shall have a pretty bit of white satin for a doll's bonnet." Fanny exerted herself and won the prize, for Polly helped Maud and neglected her own work. But she didn't care much, for Mr. Shaw said, looking at the 3 bright faces at the tea table, "I guess Polly has been making sunshine for you today." "No, indeed, sir. I haven't done anything, only dress Maud's doll." And Polly didn't think she had done much, but it was one of the little things which are always waiting to be done in this world of ours, where rainy days come so often, where spirits get out of tune, and duty won't go hand in hand with pleasure. Little things of this sort are especially good work for little people. A kind thought, an unselfish little act, a cheery little word, are so sweet and comfortable that no one can fail to feel their beauty and love the giver, no matter how small they are. Mothers do a deal of this sort of thing, unseen, unthanked, but felt and remembered long afterward, and never lost, for this is the simple magic that binds hearts together and keeps homes happy. Polly had learned this secret. She loved to do the little things that others did not see or were too busy to stop for, and while doing them, without a thought of thanks, she made sunshine for herself as well as others. There was so much love in her own home that she quickly felt the want of it in Fanny's, and puzzled herself to find out why these people were not kind and patient to one another. She did not try to settle the question, but did her best to love and serve and bear with each, and the goodwill, the gentle heart, the helpful ways and the simple manners of our little Polly made her dear to everyone, for these virtues, even in a little child, are lovely and attractive. Mr. Shaw was very kind to her, for he liked her modest, respectful manners, and Polly was so grateful for his many favors that she soon forgot her fear and showed her affection in all sorts of confiding little ways, which pleased him extremely. She used to walk across the park with him, when he went to his office in the morning, talking busily all the way and saying "Goodbye," with a nod and a smile when they parted at the great gate. At first, Mr. Shaw did not care much about it, but soon he missed her if she did not come, and found that something fresh and pleasant seemed to brighten all his day, if a small, gray-coated figure, with an intelligent face, a merry voice, and a little hand slipped confidingly into his, went with him through the wintry park. Coming home late, he liked to see a curly brown head watching at the window, to find his slippers ready, his paper in its place, and a pair of willing feet eager to wait upon him. "I wish my Fanny was more like her," he often said to himself, as he watched the girls while they thought him deep in politics or the state of the money market. Poor Mr. Shaw had been so busy getting rich that he had not found time to teach his children to love him. He was more at leisure now, and as his boy and girls grew up, he missed something. Polly was unconsciously showing him what it was, so that he felt he could not do without it any more. Yet he didn't know quite how to win the confidence of the children, who had always found him busy, indifferent, and absent-minded. As the girls were going to bed one night, Polly kissed Grandma, as usual, and Fanny laughed at her, saying, "What a baby you are! We're too old for such things now." "I don't think people are ever too old to kiss their fathers and mothers," was the quick answer. "Right, my little Polly." And Mr. Shaw stretched out his hand to her with such a kindly look that Fanny stared surprised and then said shyly, "I thought you didn't care about it, Father." "I do, my dear." And Mr. Shaw put out the other hand to Fanny, who gave him a daughterly kiss, quite forgetting everything but the tender feeling that sprung up in her heart at the renewal of the childish custom, which we never need outgrow. Mrs. Shaw was a nervous, fussy invalid who wanted something every 5 minutes. So Polly found plenty of small things to do for her, and did them so cheerfully that the poor lady loved to have the quiet, helpful child near, to wait upon her, read to her, run errands, or hand the 7 different shawls which were continually being put on or off. Grandma, too, was glad to find willing hands and feet to serve her, and Polly passed many happy hours in the quaint rooms, learning all sorts of pretty arts, and listening to pleasant chat, never dreaming how much sunshine she brought to the solitary old lady. Tom was Polly's rock ahead for a long time, because he was always breaking out in a new place, and one never knew where to find him. He tormented yet amused her, was kind one day and a bear the next. At times she fancied he was never going to be bad again, and the next thing she knew he was deep in mischief, and hooted at the idea of repentance and reformation. Polly gave him up as a hard case, but was so in the habit of helping anyone who seemed in trouble that she was good to him, simply because she couldn't help it. "What's the matter? Is your lesson too hard for you?" she asked one evening, as a groan made her look across the table to where Tom sat scowling over a pile of dilapidated books, with his hands in his hair, as if his head was in danger of flying asunder with the tremendous effort he was making. "Hard, I guess it is. What in thunder do I care about the old Carthaginians? Regulus wasn't bad, but I'm sick of him." And Tom dealt Harkness's Latin reader a thump, which expressed his feelings better than words. "I like Latin, and used to get on well when I studied it with Jimmy. Perhaps I can help you a little bit," said Polly, as Tom wiped his hot face and refreshed himself with a peanut. "You? Pooh! Girls' Latin doesn't amount to much anyway," was the grateful reply. But Polly was used to him now, and, nothing daunted, took a look at the grimy page in the middle of which Tom had stuck. She read it so well that the young gentleman stopped munching to regard her with respectful astonishment, and when she stopped, he said suspiciously, "You're a sly one, Polly, to study up so you can show off before me. But it won't do, ma'am. Turn over a dozen pages and try again." Polly obeyed, and did even better than before, saying as she looked up with a laugh, "Ha! I've been through the whole book, so you won't catch me that way, Tom." "I say, how came you to know such a lot?" asked Tom, much impressed. "I studied with Jimmy and kept up with him, for Father let us be together in all our lessons. It was so nice, and we learned so fast." "Tell me about Jimmy. He's your brother, isn't he?" "Yes, but he's dead, you know. I'll tell about him some other time. You ought to study now, and perhaps I can help you," said Polly, with a little quiver of her lips. "I shouldn't wonder if you could." And Tom spread the book between them with a grave and businesslike air, for he felt that Polly had got the better of him, and it behooved him to do his best for the honor of his sex. He went at the lesson with a will, and soon floundered out of his difficulties, for Polly gave him a lift here and there, and they went on swimmingly, till they came to some rules to be learned. Polly had forgotten them, so they both committed them to memory. Tom, with hands in his pockets, rocked to and fro, muttering rapidly, while Polly twisted the little curl on her forehead and stared at the wall, gabbling with all her might. "Done!" cried Tom presently. "Done!" echoed Polly, and then they heard each other recite till both were perfect. "That's pretty good fun," said Tom, joyfully tossing poor Harkness away, and feeling that the pleasant excitement of companionship could lend a charm even to Latin grammar. "Now, ma'am, we'll take a turn at algebra. I like that as much as I hate Latin." Polly accepted the invitation, and soon owned that Tom could beat her here. This fact restored his equanimity, but he didn't crow over her, far from it, for he helped her with a paternal patience that made her eyes twinkle with suppressed fun, as he soberly explained and illustrated, unconsciously imitating his revered teacher, till Polly found it difficult to keep from laughing in his face. "You may have another go at it any time you like," generously remarked Tom, as he shied the algebra after the Latin reader. "I'll come every evening then. I'd like to, for I haven't studied a bit since I came. You shall try and make me like algebra, and I'll try to make you like Latin, will you?" "Oh, I'd like it well enough, if there was anyone to explain it to me. Our old teacher puts us through double quick, and doesn't give a fellow a time to ask questions when we read." "Ask your father, he knows." "Don't believe he does. Shouldn't dare to bother him if he did." "Why not?" "He'd pull my ears and call me a stupid, or tell me not to worry him." "I don't think he would. He's very kind to me, and I ask lots of questions." "He likes you better than he does me." "Now, Tom, it's wrong of you to say so. Of course he loves you ever so much more than he does me," cried Polly reprovingly. "Why don't he show it then?" muttered Tom, with a half-wistful, half-defiant glance toward the library door, which stood ajar. "You act so, how can he?" asked Polly after a pause, in which she put Tom's question to herself, and could find no better reply than the one she gave him. "Why don't he give me my velocipede bicycle, then? He said if I did well at school for a month I should have it, and I've been pegging away like fury for most 6 weeks, and he don't do a thing about it. The girls get their duds because they tease. I won't do that anyway, but you don't catch me studying myself to death and no pay for it." "It's too bad, but you ought to do it because it's right, and never mind being paid," began Polly, trying to be moral, but secretly sympathizing heartily with poor Tom. "Don't you preach, Polly. If the governor took any notice of me and cared how I got on, I wouldn't mind the presents so much. But he don't care a hang, never even asked if I did well last Declamation Day, when I'd gone and learned the Battle of Lake Regillus, because he said he liked it." "Oh, Tom, did you say that one? It's splendid. Jim and I used to say Horatius together, and it was such fun. Do speak your piece to me. I do so like Macaulay's Lays." "It's dreadful long," began Tom, but his face brightened, for Polly's interest soothed his injured feelings, and he was glad to prove his elocutionary powers. He began without much spirit, but soon the martial ring of the lines fired him, and before he knew it, he was on his legs, thundering away in a grand style, while Polly listened with kindling face and absorbed attention. Tom did declaim well, for he quite forgot himself and delivered the stirring ballad with an energy that made Polly flush and tingle with admiration and delight, and quite electrified a second listener, who had heard all that went on, and watched the little scene from behind his newspaper. As Tom paused, breathless, and Polly clapped her hands enthusiastically, the sound was loudly echoed from behind him. Both whirled around, and there was Mr. Shaw standing in the doorway, applauding with all his might. Tom looked much abashed, and said not a word. Polly ran to Mr. Shaw and danced before him, saying eagerly, "Wasn't it splendid? Didn't he do well? Mayn't he have his velocipede now?"
"Capital, Tom, you'll be an orator yet. Learn another piece like that and I'll come and hear you speak it. Are you ready for your velocipede bicycle, hey?"
Polly was right, and Tom owned that the governor was kind, did like him, and hadn't entirely forgotten his promise. The boy turned red with pleasure and picked at the buttons on his jacket, while listening to this unexpected praise. But when he spoke, he looked straight up in his father's face, while his own shone with pleasure as he answered in one breath,
"Thank you, sir. I'll do it, sir. Guess I am, sir." "Very good. Then look out for your new metal horse tomorrow, sir."
And Mr. Shaw stroked the fuzzy red head with a kind hand, feeling a fatherly pleasure in the conviction that there was something in his boy after all. Tom got his bicycle the next day, named it Black Ouster, in memory of the horse in the Battle of Lake Regillus, and came to grief as soon as he began to ride his new steed. "Come out and see me go it," whispered Tom to Polly after 3 days' practice in the street, for he had already learned to ride in the rink. Polly and Maud went willingly, and watched his struggles with deep interest, till he got an upset, which nearly put an end to his velocipeding forever. "Hi there! Ouster's coming!" shouted Tom, as he came rattling down the long, steep street outside the park. They stepped aside, and he whizzed by, arms and legs going like mad, with the general appearance of a runaway engine. It would have been a triumphant descent if a big dog had not bounced suddenly through one of the openings and sent the whole concern helter-skelter into the gutter. Polly laughed as she ran to view the ruin, for Tom lay flat on his back, with the bicycle atop him, while the big dog barked wildly, and his master scolded him for his awkwardness. But when she saw Tom's face, Polly was frightened, for the color had all gone out of it. His eyes looked strange and dizzy, and drops of blood began to trickle from a great cut on his forehead. The man with the dog saw it too, and had him up in a minute, but he couldn't stand, and stared about him in a dazed sort of way as he sat on the curbstone, while Polly held her handkerchief to his forehead, and pathetically begged to know if he was killed. "Don't scare Mother. I'm all right. I got upset, didn't I?" he asked presently, eyeing the velocipede, with more anxiety about its damages than his own. "I knew you'd hurt yourself with that horrid thing. Just let it be and come home, for your head bleeds dreadfully, and everybody's looking at us," whispered Polly, trying to tie the little handkerchief over the ugly cut. "Come on, then. By Jove, how queer my head feels. Give us a boost, please. Stop howling, Maud, and come home. You bring the machine, and I'll pay you, Mr. Pat." As he spoke, Tom slowly picked himself up, and steadying himself by Polly's shoulder, issued commands, and the procession fell into line. First the big dog, barking at intervals, then the good-natured Irishman, trundling that "divil of a whirligig," as he disrespectfully called the idolized velocipede, then the wounded hero, supported by the helpful Polly, and Maud brought up the rear in tears, bearing Tom's cap. Unfortunately, Mrs. Shaw was out driving with Grandma, and Fanny was making calls, so that there was no one but Polly to stand by Tom, for the parlour-maid turned faint at the sight of blood, and the chambermaid lost her wits in the flurry. It was a bad cut, and must be sewed up at once, the doctor said as soon as he came. "Somebody must hold his head," he added, as he threaded his curved little needle. "I'll keep still, but if anybody must hold me, let Polly. You ain't afraid, are you?" asked Tom, with imploring look, for he didn't like the idea of being sewed a bit. Polly was going to shrink away, saying, "Oh, I can't," when she remembered that Tom once called her a coward. Here was her chance to prove that she wasn't. Besides, poor Tom had no one else to help him. So she came up to the sofa where he lay, and nodded reassuringly as she put a soft little hand on either side of the damaged head. "You're a good egg, Polly," whispered Tom. Then he set his teeth, clenched his hands, lay quite still, and bore it like a man. It was all over in a minute or two, and when he was nicely settled on his bed, he felt pretty comfortable in spite of the pain in his head, and being ordered to keep quiet, he said, "Thank you ever so much, Polly," and watched her with a grateful face as she crept away. He had to keep the house for a week, and laid about looking very interesting with a great black patch on his forehead. Everyone petted him, for the doctor said that if the blow had been an inch nearer the temple, it would have been fatal, and the thought of losing him so suddenly made bluff old Tom very precious all at once. His father asked him how he was 12 times a day. His mother talked continually of that dear boy's narrow escape, and Grandma cockered him up with every delicacy she could invent, and the girls waited on him with devotion. This new treatment had an excellent effect, for when neglected Tom got over his first amazement at this change of base, he blossomed out delightfully, as sick people do sometimes, and surprised his family by being unexpectedly patient, grateful, and amiable. Nobody ever knew how much good it did him, for boys seldom have confidences of this sort except with their mothers, and Mrs. Shaw had never found the key to her son's heart. But a little seed was sowed then that took root, and though it grew very slowly, it came to something in the end. Perhaps Polly helped it a little. Evening was his hardest time, for want of exercise made him as restless and nervous as it was possible for a hardy lad to be on such short notice. He couldn't sleep, so the girls amused him. Fanny played and read out loud. Polly sang and told stories, and did the latter so well that it got to be a regular thing for her to begin as soon as twilight came, and Tom was settled in his favorite place on Grandma's sofa. "Fire away, Polly," said the young sultan one evening, as his little Scheherazade sat down in her low chair, after stirring up the fire till the room was bright and cozy. "I don't feel like stories tonight, Tom. I've told all I know, and I can't make up any more," answered Polly, leaning her head on her hand with a sorrowful look that Tom had never seen before. He watched her a minute and then asked curiously, "What were you thinking about just now, when you sat staring at the fire and getting soberer and soberer every minute?" "I was thinking about Jimmy." "Would you mind telling me about him? You know you said you would sometime, but don't if you'd rather not," said Tom, lowering his rough voice respectfully. "I like to talk about him, but there isn't much to tell," began Polly, grateful for his interest. "Sitting here with you reminded me of the way I used to sit with him when he was sick. We used to have such happy times, and it's so pleasant to think about them now." "He was awfully good, wasn't he?" "No, he wasn't, but he tried to be, and Mother said that's half the battle. We used to get tired of trying, but we kept making resolutions and working hard to keep 'em. I don't think I got on much, but Jimmy did, and everyone loved him." "Didn't you ever squabble as we do?" "Yes, indeed, sometimes, but we couldn't stay mad, and always made it up again as soon as we could. Jimmy used to come round first and say, 'All serene, Polly?' so kind and jolly that I couldn't help laughing, and being friends right away.
Did he know a lot?
Yes, I think he did, for he liked to study and wanted to get on, so he could help Father. People used to call him a fine boy, and I felt so proud to hear it, but they didn't know half how wise he was, because he didn't show off a bit. I suppose sisters always are fond of their brothers, but I don't believe many girls had as much right to be as I had.
Most girls don't care 2 pins about their brothers, so that shows you don't know much about it.
Well, they ought to, if they don't, and they would if the boys were as kind to them as Jimmy was to me.
Why, what did he do?
He loved me dearly, and wasn't ashamed to show it, cried Polly, with a sob in her voice that made her answer very eloquent.
What made him die, Polly?
asked Tom, soberly, after a little pause. He got hurt coasting last winter, but he never told which boy did it, and he only lived a week, and I helped take care of him, and he was so patient I used to wonder at him, for he was in dreadful pain all the time. He gave me his books and his dog and his speckled hens and his big knife, and said, "Goodbye, Polly," and kissed me the last thing, and then, oh, Jimmy, Jimmy, if he could only come back. Poor Polly's eyes had been getting fuller and fuller, lips trembling more and more as she went on. When she came to that goodbye, she couldn't get any further, but covered up her face and cried as if her heart would break. Tom was full of sympathy, but didn't know how to show it. So he sat shaking up the camphor bottle and trying to think of something proper and comfortable to say, when Fanny came to the rescue and cuddled Polly in her arms with soothing little pats and whispers and kisses, till the tears stopped, and Polly said she didn't mean to and wouldn't any more. "I've been thinking about my dear boy all the evening, for Tom reminds me of him," she added with a sigh.
Me? How can I, when I ain't a bit like him? Cried Tom, amazed.
But you are in some ways.
I wish I was, but I can't be, for he was good, you know.
So are you when you choose. Hasn't he been good and patient? And don't we all like to pet him when he's clever, Fan? Said Polly, whose heart was still aching for her brother, and ready for his sake to find virtues even in that tormenting Tom. Yes, I don't know the boy lately, but he'll be as bad as ever when he's well, returned Fanny, who hadn't much faith in sick-bed repentances.
Much you know about it, growled Tom, lying down again,
for he had sat bolt upright when Polly made the astounding declaration that he was like the well-beloved Jimmy. That simple little history had made a deep impression on Tom, and the tearful ending touched the tender spot that most boys hide so carefully. It is very pleasant to be loved and admired, very sweet to think we shall be missed and mourned when we die, and Tom was seized with a sudden desire to imitate this boy, who hadn't done anything wonderful, yet was so dear to his sister that she cried for him a whole year after he was dead. So studious and clever, the people called him a fine fellow, and so anxious to be good that he kept on trying, till he was better even than Polly, whom Tom privately considered a model of virtue as girls go. "I just wish I had a sister like you," he broke out all of a sudden. "And I just wish I had a brother like Jim," cried Fanny, for she felt the reproach in Tom's words and knew she deserved it. "I shouldn't think you'd envy anybody, for you've got one another," said Polly, with such a wistful look that it suddenly set Tom and Fanny to wondering why they didn't have better times together and enjoy themselves, as Polly and Jim had.
"Fan don't care for anybody but herself," said Tom.
"Tom is such a bear," retorted Fanny. "I wouldn't say such things, for if anything should happen to either of you, the other would feel so sorry. Every cross word I ever said to Jimmy comes back now, and makes me wish I hadn't." 2 great tears rolled down Polly's cheeks, and were quietly wiped away, but I think they watered that sweet sentiment, called fraternal love, which till now had been neglected in the hearts of this brother and sister. They didn't say anything then, or make any plans, or confess any faults. But when they parted for the night, Fanny gave the wounded head a gentle pat. Tom never would have forgiven her if she'd have kissed him, and said in a whisper, "I hope you have a good sleep, Tommy dear." And Tom nodded back at her with a hearty, "Same to you, Fan." That was all, but it meant a great deal, for the voices were kind, and the eyes met full of that affection which makes words of little consequence. Polly saw it, and though she didn't know that she had made the sunshine, it shone back upon her so pleasantly that she fell happily asleep, though her Jimmy wasn't there to say good night. Thank you for joining us for Stories Come to Life. Be sure to join us next time when we continue to listen to An Old-Fashioned Girl by Louisa May Alcott. Please be sure to tell me what other books you'd like to listen to. I'm so glad you joined me. I'll talk to you again soon.